We've had some pretty cool crew cars in the past, but one that stands out the most has to be our invincible Toyota Hilux. The name alone conjures up idealistic images of a fearless hero fighting a David and Goliath battle versus a sadistic Mother Nature, weathering storms, traversing treacherous mountain trails, or wading waist-deep through swamps. But now we've got a new behemoth in town, the Volkswagen Amarok, a name that in car terms is a relatively blank slate. It matches the Hilux's imposing stature, but the Hilux's name positively dwarfs it. Can the Amarok even begin to compete with it? I'm here to put it to the test and try and see objectively which one has been the better crew car. People talk about a car's soul, and I feel a large part of that comes from its own legend, the stories, the background, and on that front the Hilux is king of the pickups. It's the benchmark for reliability, the poster boy for never say die, can't be killed attitude. Our old one has now gone on to bigger and better things, spending its day saving endangered animals, and you can always find a good Hilux story. Like one which apparently dragged itself over 40 miles with 4 American soldiers on board, with its rear drive shaft blown to bits. Or the fact that in New Zealand there are said to be over 100,000 of them in a population of only 4.5 million. It started way back in 1968 as a compact pickup and is now onto its 7th generation, so fast forward over 40 years and you could say the Amarok has got some serious catching up to do. The Amarok's story is slightly more modest. VW's pickup concept was unveiled in 2008 and it was introduced to the world as the Amarok in 2010. Incidentally, I mentioned the Amarok's name being dwarfed by the Hilux's, but whilst Hilux is short for high luxury, a name that really has no relevance to the Hiluxes of today, Amarok is Inuit for wolf, which is a lot cooler. Volkswagen has a connection to the name Wolf. The Volkswagen Lupo is Italian for wolf, which was named in homage to Volkswagen's base and headquarters in Wolfsburg. But in a short space of time, the Amarok has been very well received. Shortly after its 2010 launch, it was immediately used as a support vehicle on that year's Dakar Rally. 3 modified Amaroks this year broke a Guinness World Record, carrying 9 people each off-road across the entire length of Russia. In fact, the Royal Netherlands Army has now replaced its G-Wagons and now uses Amaroks, so in less than 5 years it's actually managed to do quite a lot. It is unfair in a way to directly compare these two vehicles, as our Ian Cook liveried Hilux was pimped out to the max, had bash plates, snorkel, winch, roof rack, 2 spare tyres, and was jacked up by over 50mm. Although their stats are remarkably similar, the 4-cylinder 3-litre Hilux put out 169 bhp, reached 0 to 62 in 11.6 seconds, and had a top speed of 109 miles an hour, while the 2-litre bi-turbo diesel Amarok put out 178 brake horsepower, reached 0 to 62 in 11.3 seconds, and had a top speed of 108 miles an hour. On the road, the Amarok's actually just remarkable. There's been one word that I've thought the moment I got into this car and been driving it for 5 minutes, and it's a word that's overused in cars, so I don't really like to use it, but it's just kept on repeating itself in my head, and it's refined. And this car is remarkably refined for a pickup truck. While the Hilux felt rough and ready, this just feels like a high-up Golf. It looks like it inside. It's so strange. It is the Volkswagen of pickup trucks. Again, feels like another cliche, but true. So what are you going to do? This is actually what the Hilux should be in the truest sense of the word, because technically this is high luxury. I've got the Highline trim, which is the highest one, and yeah, it really does. It feels like you're in a Volkswagen, and you don't get the sound or the noise or the drama that you get with other pickup trucks. I mean, the Hilux's wheel would vibrate at 70 miles an hour, it would just be a bit deafening, and it would drink like a supercar. There would be several shoots where Alex and I would be driving to Wales, and I'd spend more on fuel than he would, and he'd be driving some kind of mad V10. Whereas this, I mean, it's the Blue Motion. It has start-stop. It is refined. This doesn't feel like a pickup truck, so you don't get that great feeling of driving a pickup truck. In the Hilux, I would just daydream of buying more plaid and living the kind of rural, bucolic lifestyle, but Here you don't get that, and in a way that's a shame. The Hilux was rough and ready and you loved it for its quirks. I mean, that's not really a positive because it had lots of little faults, but you loved it for it, and you felt comfortable in there. It felt homely. I felt like I could bring my muddy boots in there and scuff up all the interior and it wouldn't matter, whereas this doesn't really feel like builders could buy this and mess it up because it just feels too nice in here. You don't feel like you could do any kind of pickup truck activities in here, if that makes sense, because it's just too nice. Now, the key to my heart is my wallet, unfortunately, and the Amarok knows that all too well. It's true, the Hilux had a big spare tyre and roof rack up there, which at 70 miles an hour on the motorway would have probably been the equivalent of a sail, so I couldn't really be surprised that it rarely got, over 20 mpg, which it didn't really ever. But I mean, this thing, Volkswagen say, does about 35 on the combined cycle, and you feel that. It does that, and I'm always on the motorway looking down in disbelief that I haven't yet run out of fuel, that I don't have to pour hundreds of pounds into this every few hours. It's quite remarkable, actually. It's got all the space of a pickup truck and none of the hassle. You wonder though who's going to buy this kind of thing, because it's, like I said, it's sort of too nice for construction. Maybe it's something like a landscape architect who needs something with lots of room but doesn't really get his hands too dirty. But one thing I haven't quite tested yet, and that's its off-road capabilities, because the Hilux did as its name said, it was invincible off-road, and this hasn't got all the modifications. So I wonder, will an off-road amateur like me be able to tell the difference? This doesn't have a low-range gearbox, so will I get in trouble? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to take it back to the place that we originally off-roaded the Hilux. So let's do that.
Again, this can't be shown to be a completely fair test, as there was no way this stock Amarok could compete with our heavily modified Hilux. But even so, having driven a standard Hilux and Range Rover at this very facility, I had a fairly basic idea of what this should be capable of. At first, my hesitance on the circuit was just a clear sign of my prejudice, the feeling in my head that said this car was just too pristine to be in any condition to off-road, that I didn't want to fill its underbody with stones and clay, whereas any scratches or dents given to a Hilux would only serve to increase its reputation. But having got over this, with on-road tyres and no adjustments whatsoever, I was amazed at what it can do. It's stating the obvious to say it's not quite in the same league as the Range Rover and Hilux. There were definite limitations to what it can do, but for the most part it performed admirably. And hardcore off-road capability isn't exactly what I look for in a crew car. In fact, when it comes to day-to-day functionality and ease of use, I'd have to say the Amarok takes it in every category.
I'll be honest, I was a lot more excited when told I would be getting a Hilux for a crew car than an Amarok, and that's the power of a name, but the reality has been very different. The mark of a good crew car is how much we're fond of it, and a nickname goes a long way. And whilst the Hilux was named the Canyonero after the Simpsons pastiche of an SUV that destroys everything on the road and in sight, the Amarok very quickly became the Rock. And not just because it's the last syllable in the name. If you see this thing in the flesh, you understand why. It is a rock. Comparing this to the Hilux, the Amarok has very big shoes to fill, but luckily this thing is enormous in every sense of the word.